Welcome. Today, I am talking to Christian Bladt. He is the host of the Bladtcast, which is a podcast that you can get on YouTube and all the other places you get podcasts and so forth. I've known Christian going way back for almost 25 years. Unbelievable. And met him at NBC. We were pages at NBC. In the page program together. And he's an interesting guy. He's also a writer and was working for many years with Dennis Miller. So we talk about all that kind of stuff today. He's even done a little bit of writing here and there. Had a joke or two picked up on Saturday Night Live. We got one of those. So we'll see the joke that he wrote, which Colin Quinn ended up saying on Weekend Update, which is very cool. Hey, he's a cool guy. He's out living on the West Coast now. We were hit pages together in New York City, but interesting guy for sure. And it was great to get caught up with him. So here we go. How you doing? It's been a while since I've actually seen you in person. I've watched your podcast, obviously, a few times.
I'm excited to get a chance to catch up with you. You know, I was trying to, we had some tech problems before we started, which is the nature of all of this. And I was thinking the last time I saw you, I ran into you and our friend Kevin Miller outside of 30 Rock. And I was like trying to think, I'm like, was it 7 years ago or was it 16 years ago that I saw you? Because I remember that it was fall. And I was in New York because the Mets were in the playoffs. So there's really only two times that could have been 2006 or 2015. So somewhere in one of those runs, I saw you.
I think that it was 2006. And and I guess we're that old. I think when we were emailing, you mentioned something about one of us being old. And I was like, no, we're not.
It's not possible. Yeah. It's not possible that we met what is almost 24 years ago.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I have known you for, almost 2.5 decades at this point. And, going right back to the NBC page program is where we met way back in, I want to say 1999. Is that right?
Yeah. January 1999. It was early that year. Well, that's when I started. You started in March.
I started a couple months later in March. Yeah.
But and it was I don't know if you I know some of the other people you've interviewed, so I'm sure you've talked about what the NBC page program was and what it was all about. The nice thing is that 30 Rock made it so that you could explain it in a way as long as somebody had seen the show. You know, it's like, well, Kenneth, yeah, basically like that.
Yeah.
And but we had uglier uniforms than he had on the show.
That's right. So 30 Rock made it so easy to explain what that program was. Totally put it right into the pop culture. But yeah, those were some interesting times, Christian. A lot of tours.
A lot of tours. Yeah. A lot of tours with wildly inaccurate information. Some of it was presented to us as accurate. Some of it we just spiced it up to make it more interesting to ourselves. Our buddy Tom Kelly, who I know you talked to in a past episode, when we would do what they called orientation theater, he would talk about how the person who invented sound design, Jack Foley, he would try to sneak in that he liked to be choked during sex. And
I remember
he would say Jack Foley, who liked to be choked during sex. And then then I would occasionally, because as people who know me know that I'm a Mets fan, and the bleacher seats in Studio 8H for SNL came from Yankee Stadium. They were donated by George Steinbrenner. So I would say known child molester George Steinbrenner. And, you'd say it like very matter of fact, and you'd just sneak it in. You couldn't break, you would just kind of do it. People would kind of look, wouldn't try that now. But, the 90s were a crazy time.
Yeah, you couldn't do it now, but back then too. And largely the clientele on those tours are tourists from Middle America, and they're just happy to be there, and they'll just nod and believe pretty much anything you tell them too. Well, at least back in those days.
Yeah. I don't know what it's like now, but I mean, I describe what it was like then as it was like a year-long TV sleepaway camp. Everybody was about the same age. We were all broke. you're all about the same age. And if you were single when you entered that program, that was a great place to be. There were a lot of people your age, and whatever you were into, you'd find somebody who was into it too. And we drank way too much and, legally, all that. But yeah, I remember I had a stretch that summer where it dawned on me. I'm like, oh my God, I've gone out 13 out of 14 nights. And that doesn't mean, oh, I had a couple of cocktails after work. No, I went out hard,
Yeah.
like a couple extra pitchers, stumbled home, like went out. And I was like, oh, and I think if, you reach our age and you still live life like that, that's where it's a problem. But I think in your 20s, you're supposed to be
When you're
stupid.
23,
Yeah.
when you're 23, it's fine. And really, that's what it is. It's like a fifth year of college.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
'cause
no, and it
everyone's
was
just
it was
out of
way
college.
more fun. It was way more fun than college ever was for me,
Yeah.
actually. So
Yeah, good times. I'll always remember so orientation theater. You brought it up. So I'll one thing I remember from especially about you, because you were one of the first people I think I walked around with when I was brand new and just observed how to do a tour. The old slap and crack paddle.
oh yeah.
The whole thing, orientation theater, if I remember correctly, and I should, but maybe I don't, was all about radio, because that's where NBC really got its start, was in radio.
Yeah, and it was how they would recreate baseball games, and
That's right.
they weren't broadcasting from the stadium. They would get like telex tape, and it would tell you what was happening. And the story that we were supposed to tell was how Ronald Reagan was calling a game, and the update didn't come in for a little while, so he just had the guy who was at bat like foul off like 12 pitches, which can happen now, but back then nobody took 12 pitches.
Yeah.
So so it was a lot of radio, and it was like we were so close to so many people who were on TV, people that we looked up to, people that we admired. One of my favorite things from that happened to you that I remember, you lost a bet with our pal Jay Caparez that you thought in 1999 the Phillies would have a better record than the Mets. And there's a lot of years you would have been right, but that wasn't one of them. So you had to wear a Mets shirt. And you remember that you ended up in the elevator with somebody?
I do remember. So first of all, you have a great picture of that I think you posted on Facebook at one point.
I do, actually.
Within the last year, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe I'll throw that in here.
I'll have to send that to you so you can share it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so I do remember. And I remember I ended up in the elevator with Jon Stewart, who's a noted Mets fan himself. And do you remember that?
Yeah. No, yeah. I remember that. And he's like from like the Trenton part of New Jersey, where it could go either way, but he was a Mets fan.
Yeah.
And so then you had to explain to him, like, no, I lost a bet.
That's exactly right. I got in. So first of all, I normally wouldn't even do that, because at the time I was the ticket office coordinator for Conan. And I think that the desk page, who was the main page for Conan, at a 6A desk, right? I think it was Brandy Merrick at the time.
It probably was Brandy Merrick at that point. Yeah.
I think that she had been sent off to do something, and Jon Stewart arrived. And ordinarily, the desk page would go down and pick up, the guests who are appearing on the show, right? Take them in the elevator, escort them up to the green room, right? She wasn't there. Somebody just grabbed me and said, "Go get Jon Stewart from the lobby." So I went down, I got him. He was so excited to see somebody wearing a Mets shirt. He's like, every time I come into this place, it's Yankees, Yankees, Yankees. He's like, there's a Mets fan here. I'm like, actually, John, not a Mets fan. Had to explain to him in the ride up that lost.
It's even better. It's even better that you lost a bet.
Yeah. But he was nice. He couldn't have been nicer, and couldn't have been more. I saw genuine delight in his eyes when he saw that Mets shirt and started talking. And thought for the first 10 seconds that he had a Mets fan to chat with.
Yeah,
I should have taken him right to Caparez, actually. Or
you probably should have. Yeah. Yeah. So and it's like that whole year is filled with moments like that. Like, oh, you have to go get this person, when we did the SNL 25th anniversary, you had people who were clamoring for, like, I remember who, and I won't say who she was, but there was somebody who was like, oh, I'm going to bring Jerry Seinfeld up. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Go ahead. But oddly enough, the person I wanted to make sure I got, there wasn't a long list for it, I wanted to make sure I brought Dennis Miller up, and I did, and I talked to him. So the first time I ever talked to Dennis Miller was in 1999. It was for the SNL 25th anniversary, and he told me he hadn't been there since he left the show. And I was like, we're just making small talk. I'm like, oh, really? Why is that? He's like, it's the kind of place my wife doesn't want me to hang around.
Makes sense.
It was a great answer, you know.
How long had that been since when did he leave the show?
91.
So that was like 8 years then.
Yeah, exactly. And he'd had a failed syndicated talk show. He had a wildly successful HBO show, which was still on at that point. The ebb and flow of Dennis Miller's career basically follows when did he start working with me, and when did it start to slide a little bit,
and everything else.
Yeah, it's still incredibly successful, but the heyday is before I walk in the door.
Yeah. Well, wait a second before we get on to that, because you did have a big career. But how did you end up getting to go pick him up from?
It was just that's who I wanted, and I also ended up walking up Billy Crystal. And it was great, just randomly, dumb luck. He had been put into the same dressing room that had been his when he was on the show in 1984 and 1985. And he was telling me about all the, it's like, oh yeah, and this was Christopher Guest's room, just all this. Yeah. And he's just Billy Crystal, making small talk with me. The guy who at that point hosted the Emmys, the Oscars basically every year. So I was just like, oh, this is great. But for me personally, I was more excited to get a chance to talk to Dennis. So basically, I called dibs on somebody that no one was looking to call dibs on,
Yeah. I think you were a little more senior than me. I don't recall being asked to call dibs or getting a chance to even call any dibs,
Yeah, there were like elevator keys, I think they called them.
Yeah.
And because I had interned at SNL, and then I had the desk assignment for like 2 weeks at the end of the previous season, and then everyone else had left. I was the only one who knew how things worked there. So I ended up training the new pages for the anniversary show. So I was there because I knew who people were. I knew where things were. I knew what to show. There's just this crazy enormous key ring that you would think is like a prop, and it's like there's so many keys on it, and like you'd have to like really take your time and like really fish through it and find which dressing room it opened and all that. But so I just, part of what I ended up doing that night was escorting up the talent, because closer to the studio you didn't need 4 pages basically, you know. So so that's how I ended up doing that.
Yeah, and that was a who's who that night of everybody who was, first of all, anyone who had come through SNL, but there were
except Eddie Murphy.
Except Eddie Murphy, right?
Yeah.
Has he ever been back yet?
Yeah, he hosted in like 2018, 2019. Yeah. And honestly, it was great.
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't like an old timers day where you see like, oh, okay, but it was more like the last year of Jamie Moyer's career where you're like, okay, he's 48 and he can still, throw some of those pitches, but he probably shouldn't be pitching. So he was still funny and he did some of his old characters. It was good. It was great to see him, but it was mostly nostalgia. Like, it's not like he could have like the next week been like, all right, I'm ready to do this again, So,
I mean, he had to have been way out of practice at that point. Like, I don't think he's done stand-up in decades, right?
No, there was this talk that he was supposed to. Netflix had thrown all this money at him, and he was going to start doing it. And then the pandemic hit, and then I think that's when he was just like, "This is a dumb idea," Yeah. He's sort of
like Led Zeppelin. You know what I mean? Like he just stopped, and then he's never going to do it again.
But I mean, and you know what? And him hosting SNL the one time, where he did do a monologue, that was basically like the one show that Zeppelin did with Jason Bonham. They did that one show in London in like 2007 or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, all right, I'm good. I did that.
Yeah. Everybody. I mean, I think Bill Clinton tried to get Zeppelin back, to tour again or something. And
he was distracted though. His attentions were, his eye was wandering,
Yeah. So we go back to the Page program, Christian. What else do you remember? Those are some good those are some good moments. Anything else stand out to you from that one?
I mean,
you were in for
it's
the
a
full
lot
year,
of
right?
like, big events like the SNL 25 really stand out. I didn't work it, but I know some people worked this end of the millennium party that was pretty crazy.
I worked
Uh,
that one. I
you
did work
worked
that
that,
one.
right? So
Yeah.
like that must, I mean, first of all, we were all like half worried that Y2K was going to hit at
Yep.
midnight and then the elevators weren't going to open and you were going to be trapped in 30 Rock. But, so I know people had all of that stuff, but just working on the shows and, there was talent that you could talk to, and there was talent that you didn't want to talk to. And then there was a talent that you occasionally had to give a piece of information to, and you really wished you didn't. I once had an elevator ride with Lorne Michaels that I wished I hadn't because it was just him and me.
Oh, wait, well, you got to talk about that. Let's hear about that.
I mean, I think he felt like he should fill the silence. So he, it's like the way that the elevators were set up then. I don't even know if it's still like the SNL offices are on the 17th floor, but it's like the East Wing. Yeah. So we'd have to switch over on the 14th. So we rode down from the 17th floor, and it was that voice. You've heard the impression. It's like, hold the elevator. And I'm like, oh, fuck, Lauren wants to, So I'm like, I have to. And so we ride down, and, I think he feels like he needs to say something. And basically he said something about, he asked like if I felt like the show was running on schedule or something. I'm like, all right, this is a guy just and I'm like, yep, seems good.
Here. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, seems like everything's good. And if I remember correctly, I didn't switch over and take the elevator the rest of the way down. I think I just walked away on the 14th floor so that I didn't have to ride the elevator with him.
You say you ran away from Lorne Michaels.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm probably not the only person with a story about where they ran away from Lorne Michaels. I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I'm just saying, like, man, I didn't want to be up close with him. It was,
he's an imposing figure in that building, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, one of the most imposing figures in that building. I mean, we didn't know what Matt Lauer was up to at the time. So, he seemed like he was a friendly, likable guy,
He seemed friendly and likable. Lorne did not.
No, Lorne did not, and in hindsight, Lorne's probably much, much friendlier and more likable than
probably, yeah. But yeah, to some 23-year-old, guys right out of college who all want to basically work at SNL or, Conan, which Lorne Michaels created Conan as well. Late Night with Conan O'Brien.
What a crazy thought of, because like I think at some point the idea was that Dana Carvey would do that show, and then it's like he didn't want to do it, it didn't work out, and then number 2 on the list is how about Conan O'Brien, and there were definitely some growing pains, but that was one of my favorite shows to watch before I was ever in the building. I got to intern there. Conan was always very nice to us, and he would make small talk with all the interns. I have no idea what anybody might say who worked with him basically after the year 2000 as the bit that they used to do. But I mean, he was always nice. And, I was part of there were a lot of interns from my college, Marist College. So he would be like, you guys part of the Marist Mafia? And we'd be like, yeah. And then he would just be like, you guys got fucked up over the weekend, didn't you? I'm like, yeah, we sure did. He's like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do, So it was like funny stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, Conan is a great guy, and that was a fun show. I was the ticket office coordinator. I think we talked about that. So I got to be in the studio for every taping I think I stayed in that thing for 5 months. I think after Jonathan Hefter let me stick around in that for 5 months. And it was just a great show to watch. Still remember some jokes that he told that I thought were just terrific at the time.
I mean, stuff like, just the characters and things. I mean, the year that we were in that building, there was some great comedy on that show, but that's the year that Triumph went to the Star Wars line, and just was messing with everybody in the line. That's one of my like favorite 8 minutes of television ever. Is he brings like the Mr. Spock to just give everybody the finger, and the guy dressed like Darth Vader, and Triumph is like, which one of those buttons is the button you push for your mom to come pick you up?
So funny. I know that was a great one, and I think what was that Robert Smigel who was
Yeah.
doing that?
Yeah, it's Michael.
Yeah.
And I talk this might have been when I was an intern, but Smigel, he's a very funny guy, and he seems like he's probably a very nice guy, but he's not standoffish. I think he's very shy, and he would make small talk sometimes. And I remember once hearing him talk about Triumph wasn't the only dog character that he did. There were a bunch of dog puppets, and then Triumph was the one that stuck. And they all had like that kind of East European, like Hungarian accent. And he had just matter of fact, it's like, well, to me, I think all dogs are immigrants to this country. So that's why they should talk like that. And it's like, I can't argue with that, because they came from somewhere else. I don't know where,
Yeah.
but they got off the ark, and they all got on and
Spread about the
area.
country.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So Conan was a good guy. Always nice.
And he did like some version of that show for almost 30 years,
Yeah.
So that's crazy. Yeah.
Honestly, the Tonight Show, for whatever reason, I thought was too something. It took him out of his wheelhouse slightly. It was funny, he was funny still, but it just wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was his humor was better suited to that other time slot.
Yeah.
Letterman made the transition very well. It was a very different kind of show. And I think Conan would have eventually, found his footing there. But I don't know, what did he have, 8-9 months or something like that?
Something less than a year. And then not only that, but they brought back Jay Leno.
Yeah.
To, who he had succeeded, which was, I thought that just made the whole thing weird. Kind of felt like he didn't get a fair shot at that.
Yeah. No, exactly. And, just going over to TBS, to sort of play out the rest of the contract as it was, I think worked out pretty well for him. Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. And he's great on Twitter too. I was going to say, he's very funny on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I heard an interview with him just last week. He was on Howard Stern, and I hadn't heard.
He was on Stern, yeah.
Yeah. And because there's a channel, there's a Team Coco channel on Sirius now. So just started, and he was promoting that. And he can be very insightful about his life, but he's just so funny, just like off the cuff, and just little insights. I mean, he said that this guy Tommy Blancha was the funniest comedy writer ever worked with, and he didn't even go to college, and he left to go work for what was then the WWF. And I remember that guy from when I was an intern, and it's just like, oh, there's all these explanations, so you get a lot of insight. And for a big comedy nerd, I mean, somebody like Conan was always way up there for me.
Yeah. So let's move on to Dennis Miller. So you brought Dennis Miller up in the elevator at the SNL 25th anniversary, and then a couple of years later, you're working for him, producing his radio show. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a step before that, which is, I think, how without that step, there's no way I ever would have produced any radio show, let alone his. Because I had been an NBC page, I would get these emails, these alumni emails, and it had all this contact information. Fortunately, it had contact information for both New York and Los Angeles pages. By that point, I'd moved to LA. I moved to LA in the summer of 2003. And I had seen there were two former pages who both worked on Dennis's. He had a CNBC show. And a lot of people didn't know he had a CNBC show. I would tell people that I was working on a CNBC show. And they were like, what you should do is you should get a job on that HBO show. I'm like, he doesn't have that anymore. Bill Maher has that show now. I would love to work on that show. In fact, we worked on that show for a week, Bill Maher's show.
We did. We worked on
in a warehouse in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, wasn't it like Mafia Week? I think it was.
That was what it was. Right? Yeah, it was Mafia Week. Yeah,
I forgot about that, Christian. But wow,
I didn't until I said Bill Maher. I just remembered. I'm like, wait, we both did that. Yeah. But anyway, so the one guy who was the line producer, I think at the time, this guy Chris Conti, he'd been a page in 1972, and in his office he had a picture of him with Johnny Carson playing Stump the Band. He was just sort of there. So that's like, oh, that's great. So this guy had been a page forever. And this woman, Diane Rinaldi, who worked there too. And I just, I just didn't cold call them, but I wrote to them, sent them my resume, and they didn't have anything at the point, but they met with me anyway. And then within like a few weeks, they just had an opening for production assistant. And I was like, I will absolutely take that. I was 28, and production assistants a lot of times were closer to being out of college. But I had no problem with that. I had some higher level jobs. I worked for Law and Order SVU as like a script coordinator and assistant to the line producer. I was just like, whatever. I just wanted to get in the door.
Yeah.
And, because to me, Dennis Miller always was just the funniest guy in comedy, as far as I was concerned. I was in middle school, and I would see him on Weekend Update, and I'm like, yep, that's what I want to do. And when I talk to like college kids, I always talk about how you should manage what your expectations are for yourself. You're probably not going to be able to be that guy on TV, especially with this mug that I've got. But the idea is like, oh, but you could work for him, so, you kind of manage where you want to end up. And I got the opportunity because one of the writers on the show, this guy, Jim Hanna, one of the funny guy to be in a room with, he wasn't the head writer, but he was sort of like, I don't know what the hierarchy was, but he was kind of like the second in charge. He would compile all the jokes, and he said, if you have any jokes, just go ahead and send them to me, and then he would pick one or two, and they'd get put in this massive packet that would get, in those days, it would get faxed to Dennis. It was not emailed to him. We would have to
That's
fax
what I was
it.
going to say. And how are you sending the jokes to him? Like,
Yeah.
Are you writing them on a piece of paper at that point?
So I would give them to Jim, and he'd circle a couple, and then there were script coordinators who would incorporate our jokes in there. And the jokes would be grouped by like setup, and like, here's all the punchlines from there. And they were just numbers. There were no names attached to it. And Dennis would pick the jokes that he thought were the funniest. They would do those in the dress rehearsal. Was just really the tech rehearsal. It wasn't really dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
And then from that, the jokes that went the best would be on the show. So I started getting some jokes on. So before too long, Jim told me that I could just email my jokes in the way that the actual writers did, myself and another PA, this guy, Gil Reif, who ended up working on Ellen for like, I don't know, 12 years, which he found his job on Ellen literally on Craigslist. So,
Wow.
Showbiz can be crazy. But anyway, so we just started sending the jokes in. And one of the writers, this guy, Bob Oshak, he started writing a lot of bits with me in it. And I would always say yes, because I'm like, this way my mom will see me on TV tonight.
Yeah.
So that seemed like fun to me. And you never said, in my mind, you never say no, because if you say no, they're not going to ask you next time.
Yeah.
And so I was dressed like a spider. I wore women's lingerie. I had a recurring bit where I was Dennis's no good teenage son, Dak. And I wore this terrible wig. And Dennis liked that I was a terrible actor, but I wasn't like mugging for the camera. I wasn't trying too hard. I was just there being me, doing these dumb bits. And so then he knew who I was, and he knew that I was sending jokes in. So when the opportunity arose to be his assistant, I ended up being Dennis's assistant. And then I was assistant to the executive producer as well the last couple months of that show. And that was one of those, we probably, a lot of us have these showbiz stories, Andrew, where that show got canceled in a way that we found out from the press release from CNBC telling you what the new show was that was going to be in our time slot. It was like, tune in on Monday for Donnie Deutsch.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was Donnie Deutsch. And I slipped into Norm a little bit there, because Donnie Deutsch seems like one of those. Make sure you watch Donnie Deutsch. Yeah, we had outlasted the John McEnroe talk show, but Donnie Deutsch came a calling, and he took the time slot. And so that was my it was actually not my first opportunity to work for a show that had been canceled. After I'd been a page, I worked on the most terrible show in TV history called Forgive or Forget, which was a syndicated show with Robin Givens by the time I worked on it. And people were so upset when that show got canceled. I got the first good night's sleep that I'd had in like 3 months. because but Dennis's TV show, that was a bit of a gut punch. That felt bad because I felt like I was on my way to probably getting to be a writer, like where my actual job would be just writing jokes and writing bits. And, I had had the good fortune when I was an intern at SNL to submit jokes to Weekend Update. Colin Quinn took over Weekend Update the first week I was an intern. So he was very much looking for jokes. He wanted jokes. He would, he would say to me in the elevators, like, you got any jokes? Here's what we need. He would go through, like, here's the things that we're looking for. And so he knew my name because on that show, if you submit a joke, your name is right there on the top. Because if you use one of the freelance submission ones, you have to pay out of pocket. So I had $100 check from Colin Quinn, and people are like, "Oh, did you frame it?" And I'm like, "No, I cashed it. I wanted the $100, but I did make a photocopy of it, and I still have that." But I'm like, "No, I wanted $100. Are you kidding?"
So hold on one second. You're an incredible documentarian. You had, I think I said this when you were, maybe I said it to you, maybe I thought about saying it to you and forgot, but you had posted a bunch of photos on Facebook from the Page era, and I was amazed. I was like, that was not the iPhone era. Okay. No. There was no smartphone to carry around. You were carrying around, I guess, disposable cameras, maybe.
I did. Yeah. I had a regular camera that I would, bring like on vacation and stuff, but we're hanging out in bars and, maybe might not have my wits about myself late at night when I'm trying to take a cab at 4 a.m. to Hoboken. So, I would bring disposable cameras. So I have a lot of those pictures. I mean, that you've seen. I got plenty more, from parties at our place in Hoboken, and with a lot of familiar faces. Every once in a while I'll look and I'm like, I have no idea who that is. But I try to remember. There's some very big personalities, I think, that we knew from those days. And it's nice to revisit sometimes. Yeah.
So you got the Colin Quinn check. You at least had that saved.
Yeah, I had one joke that actually made it on the air. I'd had some that made it to rehearsal, but I wasn't even working in the building anymore. I was actually working on that terrible show, Forgive or Forget, and I would always watch Weekend Update. What's that?
And you sent the joke in.
I would still, they still let me send them in because Colin liked my jokes. Yeah. And, it was just whatever. If it was funny, he'd pay for it. And I finally got it on in 2000. I remember that Ben Affleck was the host. And I just watched it. I'm like, oh my God, that's my joke. And I was watching with I'd randomly just seen I'd gone to a concert. I'd seen Beck in Virginia with a friend of mine who lived in Washington, D.C. And like we were watching SNL with a friend of his. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my joke. My friend like knew like, oh yeah, no, he writes jokes for it. The other guy's like, yeah, whatever, because that just seems like, oh yeah, okay, so you have a joke that's on TV. And I'm like, no, actually, I just had a joke on TV, and that means $100. So, but it's the only one I ever got on. I still believe I had another joke get on when Jimmy Fallon and Tina Fey were doing Weekend Update, but they said that another writer wrote the same joke.
Same joke, yeah.
I'm like, all right. I mean, it's worded exactly this. What am I going to do? All I could do is just keep sending them in. So,
yeah. So talk about getting your joke on the air, right? Do you remember the joke? Can you tell the joke?
I do. It has a word that we don't use anymore.
Oh,
it's not now, which makes it sound really bad. It's the R word for developmentally disabled people.
Okay, I think you can tell.
I think I can tell it. Yeah. Let me. Okay, so I essentially know the wording.
So you know what?
At the U.S. Comedy Arts Festival, Jerry Lewis said that he couldn't name any funny female comedians because to him, women are just baby machines. He then went on to spend an hour talking about his own comic genius of falling down and making fun of retarded people. And I got $100 for that.
That's good. Good.
Yeah. Job. And take that, Jerry Lewis. Yeah. Take that, Buddy Love.
And think about that, Colin Quinn delivering that, right?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. No, you can hear the way that he would hit that R word.
Thanks, everybody. At the U.S. Comedy Arts Festival in Aspen this weekend, Lifetime honoree Jerry Lewis stunned the audience by declaring, quote, "I don't like any female comedians because I think of them as producing machines that bring babies into the world." Lewis then spent an hour discussing the finer points of his own comic genius, like falling down and making fun of retarded people.
That had to be a total thrill, right?
Oh my God, yeah. Like to have a joke that I wrote on SNL, and honestly, if we were just submitting them on spec and not getting paid, I still would have kept doing it. Yeah. And it was like that joke was, years later, Dennis used one of my jokes on the Tonight Show, and I'm like, oh my God, that was so great. And somebody's like, oh, did you get paid for it? I'm like, no, I didn't get paid for it. That's like, I get paid to work for the guy, so that's kind of just goes with the territory. Yeah. But no, that was great. That was very exciting too.
And what did they pay for jokes back in those days?
It was $100 back then.
$100. That's pretty good.
Norm paid $50. I think because he bought more jokes. Colin paid $100 because that's just where he said it. I know when Dennis did it, I've just talking to people, he'd pay $25. I don't know what they pay now. I think it's still $100. But
really, so
now Colin Jost and Michael Che don't take the freelance submissions anymore.
They did,
but yeah, because obviously they're so funny. They don't need anyone else.
They got
it. They've really got the handle on that segment. And although when they write jokes for each other that the other one hasn't read, that is actually one of the funniest. There's not a lot of funny stuff on TV, not a lot of funny stuff on that show. That's some of the most legitimately funny things, like Michael Che writing mildly racist things for Colin Jost to say on live TV that he hasn't read before. That's great.
Yeah, that's a good bit. So so $100, and I mean that's pretty good back.
This is in the year 2000. Yeah,
2000. You're talking 22 years ago. So then you're writing jokes for Dennis on CNBC, and you're getting those on with a lot more regularity, right?
Yeah.
And are you still getting the thrill out of it?
Oh yeah, I have somewhere in this room in the garage I'm in. Somewhere I have a binder with all the script pages from the episodes of jokes that I wrote that actually got on the air, not ones that got into rehearsal. I saved them all, and I would record them I have a DVD somewhere. I recorded them on VHS back in those days. And I would record Dennis reading each of my jokes, including the joke he used on the Tonight Show. So yeah, I was very excited and very proud. And, it's just like Dennis has this comedy album called the Off-White album that came out in 1988. And I couldn't tell you how many times I listened to that thing. It's, so he was somebody that I always really looked up to, and I thought he was so funny, and just to be writing jokes for him, and just to watch him in rehearsal go through the jokes, he'd read it and he'd be like, "No, that's not quite right," and he'd spend what you'd think might be too long on trying to figure it out. He'd change one word, and you're like, "All right, I guess," and then the joke would kill in the live show. You're like, "Oh yeah, that one word actually made all the difference," It just, that sharp comedy mind that he had, that he had honed. I mean, at that point, even doing comedy for probably 25 years, so, just to watch him work and just to be around that environment was great.
Yeah. And such a great endorsement too, of your work, that a comedian of somebody who hosts a weekend update.
Yeah.
Is telling your jokes, that's got to be a good feeling.
Yeah, it was somebody who'd been on Monday Night Football read my jokes.
Yeah, forgot about that. Right? How long was that? 1 year? Did that last 1 year?
He did a year. They renewed him for 2 years after that. After the second year, they decided they were going to bring in. I think it was Madden and Al Michaels, and he was like, well, yeah, of course. Madden and Al Michaels replaced everybody who was in the booth. It was Dan Fouts, and I guess it was still Al Michaels. But he's like, it's like, I would hope, I think the way that he explained it at the time was he would hope that if John Madden showed up at the comic strip and wanted to do 10 minutes, he'd have to wait for Dennis to go on first. It's like, that's just, football's his thing. It's fine. But he also got paid for the year the second year on that contract didn't have to do it. So, those are always nice moments in show business when people get, and Dennis got paid out the rest of his CNBC contract too.
Yeah.
So, it's when those things happen, when you get paid to not work, obviously, I think that's the dream, really. Comedians who had like development deals and holding deals.
Deals.
Yeah. I've talked to people who've had like pilots and development, and they really hope that they don't get picked up because like then I'm gonna have to work so hard. But if they just like I submit the pilot, maybe they shoot it, and then I'm done, and I made all this money. But then I don't want to do the show for even 1 year, let alone 6.
I mean, that's one thing that amazed me about the entertainment industry was people could almost make a career out of not working.
It's true.
These talent hold deals, development deals I got. All right. They're trying to develop something with you. They're trying to do something. You got to have, there's a little bit of work with that, Christian, but the talent hold deal is just like, a studio or a company saying, we're just going to pay you to not work for someone else.
Yeah.
And that's the extent of it. It's like, you just can't work for anyone else, but we'll pay you. And we have nothing for you to do.
Yeah, and every once in a while they'll plug you into another show. They're like, okay, here's what you do. Like, okay, we have you. I think Tim Meadows had one of those after.
Tim Meadows, that's exactly what I was just thinking. He had many talent hold deals.
Yeah, and Tim Meadows is like the only celebrity encounter where I was out in the public and a celebrity recognized me, and I was with my dad. So Tim Meadows was like, "Oh, hey, Christian, we were at the Grove here in LA." And he's like, "Christian, how's it going?" And we talked or whatever. I introduced him to my dad, and my dad's like, "That guy's on Saturday Night Live." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." So it was like one of those great moments where I got recognized like in front of my dad, so I could like big time,
Yeah.
So that was pretty great. And Tim was always a great guy, and I think he's very funny. And that movie that he did, Ladies Man, is definitely it's a little bit of a sleeper. It's underrated.
It's a good
Will
movie.
Ferrell's this guy who just wants to keep wrestling everybody. It's actually pretty funny.
Yeah. All right, so let's get back to you for a second. Then on Dennis, you're on TV now. Now you're like a bit, you're like you got a recurring role on that show essentially, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how was that? I know you said
it
your
was
mom
great.
that made your mom feel nice that she could see you on TV.
It did,
right?
yeah. And I had to get, like the understanding was I had to get all my production assistant work done before before like rehearsal or before I had to be in costume or whatever.
Yeah.
As long as I could get everything I needed to do done, it was fine. And as the months went on, it was a little bit more like, all right, we'll send somebody else to do that because there were 3 PAs. So it's like if I was in a bit, they'd send one of the other ones. So yeah, it worked out pretty well. And there was one where the show had a chimpanzee at one point, and then they moved away from the chimpanzee. And to replace the chimpanzee, they had me jump out in a chimp costume. And I was running around on Dennis's desk, and it should have been humiliating, but I was just like, this is great. And so Dennis had me. He's like, wait, look in the mirror, and he had me like take off my like chimp hat. And he's like, what's your name? Where'd you go to college? He's like, do you think your parents are proud of you? I'm like, right now, yes, they are. And got a big laugh, whatever. So yeah, I would do a lot of stuff like that, and then. Just very abruptly, the rug got pulled out from under that show. After that 2004 election, the show was on for like 6 more months. It was really hard to sort of find what it was. There'd be celebrity guests. There'd be cooking segments. They would still talk politics, but people weren't as invested in it. CNBC probably wasn't the right home for that show. I always felt like if it had been on MSNBC, people probably could have found it, but that's not the way it worked out. And so we kept in touch, but I ended up going back to working for Law and Order Special Victims Unit in the LA office because I knew everybody from when I worked in the New Jersey production office. And there's some wonderful people that work there, but it was certainly not a high point in my life.
Yeah.
But then I did that for about a year. And I was kind of between things, and I was bringing it all back to Howard Stern. I was listening. On the news, Robin Quivers mentioned that Dennis Miller was going to have a nationally syndicated radio show. And I was like, wait, I have his email. I'm going to write to him. So I wrote to him, and I was just like, I'd be interested. I'm available, and I'd be interested in anything that I could possibly do to help out. So he wrote back to me, the same day, and he's like, things are in motion. Stay unaffiliated. He was telling me, like, don't go get a job. And I ended up being his assistant on the show. He did that show out of his home in the Santa Barbara area. It was when it started, it was produced by two guys in a studio in New York who'd had experience doing a show with a host who was, in another location. I think also somebody who did it from home. So they seemed to be well suited to it. And Dennis is not difficult to work with one-on-one. And I say that because it was very particular. Here's the way to present things to him. Here's what you do. Here's what you don't do. And so I talked to this guy who was the producer of the show. I told him all the things that I felt like, here's how it's going to work for you. And he didn't listen to any of them. And he did not, he had that job for 3 months. And they were going to start bringing in radio people. There was one person that came in and just like observed. They were going to start interviewing radio people to take over. And then Dennis had the idea at some point, like, that last guy was a radio guy and he was terrible. You and I get along. Why don't you just do it? And I had to think about it, because I was just like, well, I want to be a writer. I don't know that I want to produce a radio show. I also don't know how to produce a radio show. And I talked to somebody who had to make a similar decision. This guy, Kevin, who had been a segment producer on Dennis's CNBC show, but he also wanted to be a writer. He went on to become a writer on the Daily Show. And he was the one person I could think of. I'm like, I'm going to call him. And he's like, you should take it. So, and I talked to my now wife, my then girlfriend, Heather, who I met on Dennis's CNBC show. So like so much of my life like comes from that CNBC show. So I told Dennis, I'm like, yeah, no, I'll definitely do it, And he was like, he's like, it was just like, if I'm ever being an asshole, you need to tell me. It's like that's the most important part of your job. I'm like, all right. I think I probably told him once.
Yeah. How do you tell him something like that? Dennis.
Because if I'm going to tell him, he knows. You know what I mean? If I'm actually going to say it out loud, he knows what he's doing.
I mean, like, how do you summon, how do you tell him? Like, I don't know that I'd be able to do that part of the job.
It wasn't, it was, like I said, it was probably once, and it wasn't in the first, 4 years, And so like the head of news and talk for Westwood One was the company that we did it. He called me and he's like, yeah, so Dennis has this idea for you to do this. And I understand that you want to do it. And he's just like, look, we can help you learn all the radio stuff. What we can't do is help somebody learn necessarily how to do the show in a way that Dennis is comfortable with.
Yeah.
That interaction isn't going to be taught very easily. I tried to teach it to somebody. I was never trying to take this guy's job. I didn't even think of it. I should have sabotaged him, but I wasn't thinking like that. So I did that for 8 years. And
That's
when
amazing.
the show started, there had been a co-host, like a sidekick. And about 2 years in, they parted ways. They parted company, as they say. And at first, he just was like, all right, I'll just talk to you. And he'd always talk to me a little bit. And he started talking to me a lot more when the co-host wasn't there. And I think I was just able to kind of run with it. And the kind of compliments that I would get from him, like off the air, for like how quick I would be, on my feet, he's like, you got pro chops, and he's like, you're up there with Shandling. And I'm like, all right, stop, but please give me more, just the things that he would say. He was so complimentary. He's always been so complimentary. He's like, yeah, I can't believe that, all these, they got all these kids out of Harvard writing on The Simpsons and you're stuck working on this radio show. He'd say things like that.
Yeah.
So he's always very complimentary. He always, genuinely, I think, liked talking to me. He liked kind of my insight. He knew some buttons to push. There were people in the public eye that I was not a big fan of. So if they came up in a story, he was like, oh, let's lean on this, let's have fun with that. And, I mean, look, it's all a show. Like,
Yeah.
even like the dynamic between Dennis and me, you play it up for the radio, it's like you and I grew up listening to the Howard Stern show. How much of that stuff was real? Some of it, but you got to play it up.
I mean,
And
most of that was written,
Yeah.
like it may not be scripted, but they had it planned,
Yeah, right, exactly. And so it's just like, and I always kind of liked that idea, and so yeah, I did that for 8 years, and sort of as like an offshoot, so we started that show in 2007. 2008 was a presidential election. That was my first year in political talk, doing a presidential election. That was grueling. That was pretty exhausting. Showbiz exhausting. Not digging ditch, not driving, pizza delivery exhausting. But I was always tired because I would get up at when I started, I would get up at 3:30, and then at some point I'm like, I can't set my alarm before 4:00. I'll just I'll try and get more work done the night before.
What were you getting up at 3:30 in the morning for?
Because the show started at 7. So,
right.
And I had to drive like 45 minutes, and I wanted to get there and then do my work. I didn't want to be like rushing.
Right. Well, if the show started at 7. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was why. And, it was, but then 2012 was another presidential election, and, the host was not too excited about the way that election went, let's just say. And that took a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the show. But I had kind of had this idea for a while, talking about Howard Stern, and he had these channels on Sirius, and they had a lot of programming to fill. And I would never for a second think like, well, I could do what Howard does. But I was like, they have this wrap up show. They have this like fan roundtable show. I could be as good as those shows.
Yeah.
So that was why I was just like, I'm going to start doing a podcast, and we'll put it on the website, and, put it on, I think it was on iTunes right away. And I was just like, I'll just talk to the other guys who I work on the show with. The idea was it would sort of be like an after show, and we would talk about the show when it started, and we would have guests on, and the guests would be like some of the regular callers or some of the more prolific posters on the show's message board, because it was like playing to that audience. It was definitely a niche show. And I mean, we started that in the beginning of 2013, and within a couple months it was like we barely talked about the show anymore, other than the fact that we worked there. So and I mean, I understood podcasting, what it was. Our mutual friend Tom Kelly was the first person I knew who ever had a podcast. He had a podcast in 2004 called This Show Again, and I didn't know how to listen to it. I would download it on my laptop to a CD, and then I listened to the CD in my car. I had no idea how else that's the only way I could figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Well, back then it's not as easy as it is now.
No, yeah, I know. It's because now it's like on your phone or whatever, I mean, and before that you could put it on your iPod, even that was like still easier than like, I'm going to burn a CD. And it's not like you could like rewrite over the CD. So probably somewhere I've got a CD of a Tom Kelly podcast from 20 years ago. But so, and so I started doing that, and then it was fun. And then because I did that, and I mean, I still do that show, and a couple of the guys that I work with are still on pretty regularly, on the Bladtcast is what the name of that show is. If I can work a plug in, Bladtcast. I think we're up to 511 episodes now. So yeah. And our 500th episode, I asked John Lovitz if he would be a guest, and he said he would be happy to. I got to know him through Dennis. And I did like 2 hours with John Lovitz. So if you want any episode of that show, look for episode 500. It's on YouTube, or it's also where you can find your podcasts anywhere. Anyway, so because I was doing all that, I started to kind of get the idea. I would listen to Jim Rome after I doing the radio show, because if you worked on a political show, the last thing I wanted to hear on the drive home was politics.
Yeah.
And Jim Rome's show is very gimmicky. It wasn't on in New York, so I never really had an opportunity to listen to it, but the timing worked out in LA, and, there were some ins and outs of it. And Jim Rome would sometimes have his producer, this guy, Kyle Brandt, who now works for ESPN. He would guest host sometime.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, I mean, Kyle Brandt's guest host, and I could probably guest host. But I didn't ask to guest host for Dennis. But then there was a day that he was sick, and I went through, and so like I didn't have the day before. So the morning of, I'm texting, we had a couple of guys, we had a few women guest hosts. I went through our regulars, and none of them could do it. And so then I messaged, I think I called our head of talk, and I was like, what if I do the show? I think we had a couple of guests that I didn't feel like I could rebook very easily.
Yeah.
And I was like, what if I did the show? And look, you tell me if the first hour is bad. If I think it's bad, we'll just play a best of for the other 2 hours. And he was like, yeah, it's fine. Let's do it. He's like, I think he said, yeah, I seem to remember, Ed McMahon even guest hosted the Tonight Show a couple times. So let's give it a try. And so I did that. And I only felt comfortable doing that because I had done a podcast, which is silly. Oh yeah, I can do national radio because I've done a little podcast that, hundreds of people would listen to each week at that point. And because I was just in a room and my friends who I talk to all the time were on the other side of the glass, I don't think I thought about the fact of how many people are listening to me right now? Yeah, you can't really have stage fright when you're in a radio studio, And so I guest hosted a bunch of times. And for the most part, people liked that. There was a program director in Reno, though, who he used the word vanilla. I used to have the exact quote in my bio, but I actually forget now what he said. And when I would guest host, they would just air a different show.
Is that right?
A local show. Yeah, he wouldn't air it when I was on because he didn't like me.
So so program directors could just at different radios. This is a syndicated show, right?
Yeah.
And they can just override it if they felt like it.
They felt like it, yeah. I mean, wow. It's not like they didn't have to. They had to pay 365th less for licensing the show.
Cool. Yeah.
You still had to pay for it. So it's just and it's like how in LA, I think not in LA, but it's somewhere else in Southern California. We were on a station that had Lakers games, and they would run the show at night. So we got preempted all the time. But when you get preempted for sports, that counts for your ratings. So it's like, well, we're a huge hit on that station, So yeah, I mean, you can preempt it for any reason. Sometimes for breaking news, we get preempted because our show would have been that morning. So I had fun. I got to talk to people. I got to talk to Steve Carell and Seth MacFarlane. I got to do short little interviews with them because they were part of a radio tour. And I'm always like, just so they know, it's not going to be Dennis. They're like, yeah, whatever. It's just they got to hit. Right. They got 5 minutes with him. Yeah. So, So, I mean, that was fun. And I don't know. I mean, doing the podcast is really a lot of fun. I know you've done a few of these where you talk to people, but it's for the most part, it's like an excuse to bullshit with your friends,
Yeah, I am a novice compared to you, Christian. I think this is my fifth episode, I should say.
Well, you do 506 more, you'll be right up there.
Yeah. Well, I get 3 more scheduled later today, so
that's perfect. Yeah, just keep it going.
Yeah. In watching yours, I do feel like you have some radio influence to yours, or there's some conventions of radio sort of built in. You have a thing where I guess people who are listening live can just chime in, and you'll read their comment, and it even shows up sometimes at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, the program that I use, StreamYard, you can put the comments from the chat, and the chat it's either YouTube or you can do it on Twitch. You can do it a few places, and you bring the comments up, and I like that sort of interactive nature to it. I think that in radio, some hosts go to the phone calls a little bit too quickly and they might spend too much time on it. But I found it to be fun to kind of have well, here's a topic we're talking about. And what do you think about this? It would be it's a way to kind of deal with having live calls, but it's just, getting the comments in. And, most of the shows I do on my YouTube channel, I do a show about Marvel movies and TV. I do a show about politics once a month. And it's great to have the input, the actual instant feedback. That's definitely a fun part of it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's cool. And it's it's not quite radio because it's not a phone. It's not a caller, but it's sort of like that. And it's sort of like the spirit of that, at least. So that's a cool thing. And I guess it all comes, now that I'm thinking about it, I guess it all comes back to orientation theater, where we were talking about radio and
yeah,
destined to do radio.
Yeah, no, I mean it's I was a big fan of radio growing up before I wouldn't have gotten in trouble for listening to Howard Stern in my bedroom. I would listen to, the pop station in New York, Z100 is a huge station, and they engineered the morning zoo format, which is highly derided in this day and age. But it was kind of edgy when you were, in middle school. I mean, I liked that, and I liked the Dr. Demento show, where people would do song parodies and stuff. So it was great for when I was a kid. I loved stuff like that. So I always liked radio, and just sort of set my sights probably a little too high, and tried to get into TV. After the radio show ended, it was probably about 3 years later, Dennis decided to do a podcast. And first, he didn't want to talk about politics. He wanted to do a sports podcast. And he just asked me if I could just sit in for the first one. If I didn't have the time, it was fine. And I'm like, I'm going to move my schedule around so I can sit in and do this podcast with you. And we did that. And after the first one, he was just like, he just felt like he wanted me to be there because he wanted somebody to bounce things off of. So he started paying me out of his company. Like, the company we did the show for never paid me. I didn't work for them. I worked for Dennis. And we did the show for 3 years over 2 different companies. And I mean, the second iteration of the show, I started booking more guests, putting on a lot of comedians, people that I thought were funny, that I thought that he would like. It's like, I put him on with like Anthony Cumia and Jim Norton and people like that, who I was, he didn't really know who Jim Florentine was, but he thought he was, funny, and, and then, you also have the advantage that guys like Bill Burr want to talk to Dennis Miller, so yeah, I mean, it was a fun show to do. And then, that was really the end of 2020, but that was a great gig to have in the pandemic because he was always doing the show from home. I had been going into a studio in Culver City, but instead I just started doing it down here. That's how I carved out this little corner in my garage. And then I started doing my podcast this way. And I was telling you before we started, just all these interviews would come my way. I talked to a lot of musicians, and I'm like, I don't know that I help move the needle for any of them, and authors and things. I get a lot of opportunities to talk to people because it's so much easier to do now. I mean, you and I are talking right now instead of you like, well, let me know if you're ever back in New York, and we can try and book some studio time, which, 15, 20 years ago, that's pretty much what we would have had to do. Or I could have done a phoner, and it would have sounded terrible. So.
Yeah, no, this is great. And it's made it so much easier. And that's when I started doing it. And during the pandemic, I was like, I'm home. I can't get out. You can't get out anyway at that point, but Zoom or whatever. We're not using Zoom right now because we did have some technical issues, but it makes it so much easier. So let's just plug your the Bladtcast one more time. Bladtcast, you're on YouTube. You're on anywhere you can listen to a podcast.
Yeah, just BLADTCAST. My social media is at Christian DMZ. That's my Instagram. You never know. Every morning we get up and we still have Twitter, but that might, by the time people hear this, maybe they won't. So, but yeah, and then I'm very easily found in there. And it's funny because I'm like I'm very easily approachable. People still ask me like, oh, can we get Dennis to do an interview for this? I'm like, I'll ask, but I'm going to tell you right now, he's probably going to say no. He just doesn't really do that much. He's mostly retired at this point. I talked to him right before the baseball playoffs started, because that was something we usually talked about. And, and I'll send him pictures of my kids. He gets excited to see, how big they're getting, stuff like that. But, it's fun. I think that I still know this guy that I used to watch on TV, and, there's always the idea that if he ever works on something again, that it makes sense, I'd be happy to work with him. But, at the moment,
it's amazing. It all goes back to that elevator ride.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But it's all because of which I'm not in that elevator if I'm not in the Page program, and I can't email those 2 people who got me on his CNBC show if I'm not in the Page program, and I'm not in the Page program if I don't intern first at Late Night with Conan O'Brien in the fall of 1997. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk. You brought it up, so we'll switch to that now. Twitter. What do you think, Christian? You're a pretty big power user of Twitter yourself. I don't like to get too much into current events here because I don't want to. I want this to just be listenable whenever.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to avoid the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think it's as anybody who isn't just a casual fan of their local sports teams, when you're a diehard fan and you get a new manager, I mean, and you might think like this is going to be great, like this is a new person with new ideas. And I think that people were just so excited for Twitter to have this new guy that, is definitely a really weird dude, but it's like Elon Musk. He says he's going to bring back free speech. Well, don't make fun of him though. Don't pretend to be him, so like within the first couple days, we're like, well, there's limits to that. And I think there should be limits. I think you should have free speech, but let's not have that include hate speech. And I think being able to speak your mind is very important. However, you need to be able to face consequences, and there's very real consequences for speaking your mind. So even the level that I have people following me, I only very casually comment on things, and I probably have more unfinished drafts in my Twitter folder of stuff. I'm like, I don't want to post that. Like, I don't want the headache on that,
Yeah.
And I had like a couple of Twitters, one that was specifically for my podcast and one that was me. I had like a couple of Facebooks because too many people were like trying to be my real life like Facebook friends, and I realized I'm like, oh, I don't want that. There was like it was like too blurred, so I had to just kind of put the line down between them. And I think that look, something like Twitter can work, but it doesn't have to. It's like you can still kind of communicate the same way in Instagram. I don't get TikTok at all. I feel like I aged out of TikTok before it ever started.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if you have a TikTok, Andrew, but I
I might have one because I think I had to try to keep an eye on my kids. Because my younger son is on TikTok. My older son is not. My younger son he can't get off TikTok actually. But I think my wife and I both tried to create accounts to keep an eye on it. But then if you don't check in a lot, which I kind of failed at that, I think they take it away from you and you have to create a new one or something. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't really get TikTok. Also not a fan of all the surveillance that they apparently are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, at its best, Twitter was a great place to flip through for a little while, get some news updates, sometimes about, showbiz, sports, impending trades and things like that. Usually you get a couple of good jokes and then you can, walk away from it. I would try to be funny. I tried to carve out a niche at one point of when a celebrity would die, I would try to be the first one with a joke about them dying. And, I got a very minor amount of traction doing that at one point, but, I think it could be a fun place, but I don't know. It reminds you of how terrible people are. It doesn't matter what your outlook is on life. It doesn't matter who you vote for, who you don't vote for. If you don't vote at all, there's just terrible people out there in the world. And this is a way for them to talk to you directly. And I don't know that I want the whole world in coming to my eyeballs,
Yeah, I hear you. And I think even, before Elon Musk took over Twitter, I thought Twitter was unfairly criticized for other people's bad behavior. You know what I mean? Yeah. People doing hate speech, people harassing others, whatever. Like at some point, it's just a platform. People have to be, responsible for their own actions. Like you can't just, I don't know why Twitter somehow made it, Twitter, felt like it was okay to do that for some reason,
people who really badmouth Twitter weren't on Parler in January of 2021. I was on Parler for a moment. I posted like twice, And I selected my feed of who I was looking at, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a lot of like words in here I don't like, and they're not even the ones that you might think. It was like, I was very unsurprised that something happened the way it did on January 6th, because I was just like, oh yeah, this is what everybody was talking about on Parler for like the 2 weeks beforehand.
Is that right? You saw
So
it coming?
yeah, I mean, there was definitely people were talking about like we have to do something, and people usually it's like, yeah, we have to have a rally, or we have to vote in stronger numbers next time. Yeah, but it was like we got to get a lot of rope. You have any zip ties? And it's like, all right, so I signed out and I never signed back in.
Yeah.
But so yeah, there's a very militant, violent, very far left contingent as well. You people throwing trash cans into Starbucks and banks in New York, or Bank of America, whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I don't like that either. So
yeah. No, I don't get why I don't get why people don't try to just have more fun on it. To me, the idea of Twitter is a very fun idea. Just sharing these short bursts of whatever it may be. Story, joke, information. But why people, so many people. I get that, right? In any crowd, there's going to be some. You're going to have some people who just act poorly. But it seems like so many on Twitter just had the worst behavior. We're always on their worst behavior.
Yeah, it's you had like people that early on kind of got Twitter and were very funny. Steve Martin, Norm Macdonald was amazing on Twitter. I was, and he would just periodically just delete all of his tweets and then just start over. But he had a lot of insight to the SNL 40th anniversary special, some stuff that he had written, and that sort of a thing. And but then also just he'd be like on a flight, stuck like circling, and so he'd just use it to like tweet. And just like his live tweeting was very funny. So yeah, I mean, I kind of miss that aspect of Twitter. If I were to look at my timeline right now, there wouldn't be a lot of like, oh, I want to read this whole thread from someone, So I don't know.
So what's your take then? Do you think the past few days I've been seeing a lot of people talking about it not being around, like Twitter's going down.
Yeah, people are just made me start to think that must happen. I mean, I know that Elon Musk bought it for like $44 billion.
Yeah.
And then within the first couple of days, its value was like $8 billion. Still a lot of money.
Well, he overpaid for it. It was already, if you went by the stock price, it was he was way overpaying for it, because he locked in that price, and then the stock value went down.
But like all the developers seem to be getting fired and getting into little fights online with him.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, at some point there isn't going to be anybody that knows how to run Twitter anymore, So I feel like it'll be around for a little while, but I think if the functionality doesn't work, you have people that don't want to, you have advertisers have reallocated some of their money towards TikTok or YouTube or other places. So if the money doesn't come in, I'm not paying for an $8 check mark. I wouldn't pay $1 for a check mark.
Well, I think there's not going to be a lot. Well, there already are some people paying for it. I'm not paying for it. A lot of people, a lot of others may not, but I also think he did spend $44 billion on it. I just don't see a scenario where it just ceases to exist. And $44 billion just like goes up in smoke.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, because regardless of how much money he has, and I was reminded this morning, he's got like 10 kids, so he's like the Nick Cannon of the tech world. I didn't even realize. So good for him. But yeah, you want to get some return on your 44 billion, so I don't know. I just think that people who thought that this was a guy who was going to save Twitter, I don't think understood what Twitter was, and that you can't, you can kind of stretch it out a little bit longer. You can give it a couple more years of life, maybe, but I think ultimately it'll outlive its usefulness, but I mean, I think, we all still have MySpace accounts. I think I just don't know the password. I couldn't even get into it if I tried.
Yeah, I actually never had a MySpace.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I even had a Friendster. So
I can't remember if I had a Friendster. I think I did.
Yeah.
I think I signed up for it.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about how you needed to have TikTok because you're kids. I'm lucky in that my son is 7 and my daughter's about to turn 5, so I don't have to get there quite yet. And if my son wants to watch something on YouTube, I tell him he has to ask us, and then sit at the table and watch it. Because even kids YouTube, I was finding, I'm like, oh my God, there's like all these like really long drawn out like videos that people made where they're playing with toys, and these aren't kids. Like I don't want to pre-screen like a 3-hour, unboxing video,
Yeah. So do your kids have their own devices?
There's an iPad that they get to use. My son needed it because his kindergarten was done over Zoom for most of the year that he was in kindergarten. So we needed to get him a good iPad, and they still use it for like Mandarin class and stuff like that. But yeah, they get to watch stuff on it, but they don't have it like in their room where like they get to watch it without us around,
Yeah.
Because I had a TV in my room as a kid, so I know the trouble that you can get into.
So you're lucky you're not there yet, but you're not that far off. I imagine that they're going to demand a phone or something soon. Although we held out till they were 11. Our boys, I have, my daughter's 8. She doesn't have a phone. She does have an iPad, but there's only limited things she can do with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had this conversation with other parents where we're like, we're not really sure when is the right age, but what we know is when the first kid in their class has a phone, then you're like, you can stretch it out for a little bit.
Yeah.
But when they're the only one without the phone, then you're like, what are you doing? Are you being a bad parent?
It's doubtful you're going to get to that point, right? Like that you're going to be the only
no,
one. Right?
No, I wouldn't want my son to be the
even if you did want it, you probably would just break down.
Yeah, I know at some point. Yeah. So
I do think though there's something to holding out for as long as you can.
Yeah. No, 11 doesn't sound as crazy. I mean, in some ways, I guess it does.
And it may be changing too. Like 11 for my 14-year-old was 3 years ago, and for my almost 13-year-old that was 2 years ago. Who knows? I don't know if we'll make it to 11 with my daughter.
And by the time my kids need it, it'll probably be a VR helmet with
I know.
one of those chips they put in the back of your neck or something. So whatever it is, I'll probably be like, yeah, go ask your mother.
And how is being a dad there, Christian?
It's good. I mean, they're little, and it's funny. I'm going to borrow this from Dennis Miller because it summarizes it better than I think I could. He talked about, he had been married a few years before he and his wife had kids. And he said that after his first son was born and he saw the way his wife looked at him, the son, she realized he realized, oh yeah, she never felt that from me. He's like, at the end of the day, you're just a date that worked out, but then there's this actual kind of love. But then to expand on it, this is like the way the kids look at you and look up to you. And despite some of the most terrible things they might say to you, there is still this, it's to be upheld in that way, to be in anybody's esteem. You're like, what? But I mean, it's great to watch, and it's already been 7 years since I was first a parent, and I can't believe that went that fast. I can't believe my little daughter's about to be 5. You're talking about 13, 14, whatever. Before I know it, I mean, all that's going to happen. And, the point where they'll outright, they'll tell me they hate me. That's coming any day now.
It's coming,
we've gotten close to it a couple of times,
It's coming. It'll happen. Speaking
but
of technology, I've always watched movies and people be on the phone and they just hang up, in movies. And like, I was always like, what? Who hangs up in real life? Like, who just hangs up and doesn't say goodbye?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever thought this, but
No, it seems like something a psychopath would do.
It seems like that, but when I found out, the answer came to me. It's my own kids do it, right? I'll be like talking to them, I'll be like, all right, and I'll pick you up here, and then like they're gone. And I'm like, they just hung up on me. They just hang up.
Like I don't want to get to the part where I'm expected to say I love you, so I'll just hang up, you know.
Yeah.
But
so
yeah, I mean it's great, and I mean honestly, I think I think of all the things that my kids have that I didn't, and I mean a lot of that is just like technology and just availability. I mean, I finally was able to get through the I started this summer. I watched the original 3 Star Wars movies with my son, and just that having that experience is like, all right, yeah, I mean this you'll trade all the other bad stuff to have moments like that, so it's pretty great. And I mean we live in Los Angeles, so it's warmer most of the year than the way I grew up. They're never going to have to shovel a driveway before school. They're never going to have to listen to the radio to see if you've got a 2-hour delay or if school's closed for the day for a snow day. It's a lot of different things like that. But my wife's family is out here, like her immediate family and extended family. So they have a lot of, they have a lot of family time, which I had as a kid. I mean, my mom had 5 sisters and they all lived in New Jersey, relatively close to us. So, I think that's the important thing, is just getting to, spend time with other kids, spend time with family, and, going back to school after school's closed for the pandemic. We sent our kids back in the middle of August that year. We sent them back to preschool so my son could do his distance learning, and they had never run away from us faster than after having to spend 5 months with us. So and I think it's important that they got the FaceTime with their friends again, and the world is still an incredibly scary place for those reasons and a million more, but the fact that they can live as normal life as they can, you feel like you're doing something reasonably well if your kids are reasonably happy.
Yeah. And how about you mentioned that you're living in LA. You've been out there for a long time now. Are you ever coming back east?
I mean, I've come. I was back in May.
I don't mean coming back
2 weeks.
I mean moving.
But no. I mean, first of all, my wife's family's here, and the only places to really live if you work in entertainment, for the most part, are New York and LA. So a job opportunity for either myself or my wife would probably be the only thing that would bring us there. It would have to be something pretty big to have us actually move back full time. I think if my wife had 20 weeks on a show that was out there, we'd figure it out. If I worked on a project that was out there, we'd see what we can do. Yeah. But
your wife's a writer, TV writer, right?
My wife's a TV writer. Yeah. So the most current thing she has is Mysterious Benedict Society on Disney Plus, season 2, airing now. You can find her episode. I believe her episode was episode 2. In any case, so yeah, and it's fun to go back. A lot of my family's moved away. My parents live in Florida now, of course, separately, but so it's there's less to come back for. But even when I first moved, I've been out here 19 and almost 19 and a half years, so almost 20 years.
That's amazing.
What I would realize is when I would get together with you and everybody, and I'd see everybody, I'm like, oh my God, this is so great. I'd realize oh wait, they haven't seen each other either since last year when I was, it was oh wait, so everybody's not hanging out like we did when we were in our early 20s, so
right here, this is the most hanging out I've done.
Yeah, right. Yeah, doing it online, and it's it's like the New York that I miss doesn't exist anymore, because it was all about the people that I would get to see, and the things that we would do, and it's yeah, pizza's not as good here, but the Mexican food is so shitty in New York, so it's a trade-off, so I can't believe that I would spend money at that place, Tortilla Flats. That place would have been run out of Burbank, not much less, Los Angeles proper. So, I don't have like a longing or a desire to move back because I don't know what I would move back for. Opportunity, I would move back. Opportunity, I'd go to Vancouver for the right opportunity. I mean, whatever the opportunity is. But, with my wife being from here and her family here and my kids growing up here, I can't imagine moving back. And I think I moved at pretty much the exact right time. I was like 27. I had felt like I'd squeezed as much as I personally was going to be able to get out of New York. And, within a year of living in Los Angeles, I had not just met Dennis Miller, I'd written jokes for him. I'd gotten to know him. I'd met my wife. I was here like a year. I had just started dating my wife, my now wife. So, it was, it felt like the right move, and there's, some great people, the people that we mutually know that live out here now. I ran into Josh Payne at a Halloween party, and I moved out here with our mutual friend, Tim Sicardo. We had a production company and a website once upon a time, and, it's, so it's, go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you see Sicardo much anymore?
Yeah, or? we both live in Burbank, so he's a little bit busier than I am usually, but we have lunch, probably every couple months or whatever. We've bought a new house, so we're going to be even closer to him in the new year. So you probably would spit it out and say it's disgusting, but our favorite meeting spot is a chain called Philly's Best, where you can get the closest approximation to a good Philly cheesesteak here in the Los Angeles
Southern Cal, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think if you visited and you went, you'd be like, you're joking with this place, right?
Well, hey, you know what? I gotta try it. You can actually get a decent cheesesteak in New York City.
They're obviously from Philly. You gotta look, because there's places where they would just make like a steak-em with Velveeta on it. But
no. There's places now, even in Times Square, there's a great like indoor food mall that they opened up. I don't know. I want to say maybe about 7 years ago, 2015. They opened it up. That really, really good, and you can get a fantastic cheesesteak there actually.
All right.
Perfectly edible. When I was working in Times Square for a while, I would go there for lunch. Every couple of weeks, because why not?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I'll have to ask you. Yeah, and we talked about Jason Caprez earlier. He lives out here. I've seen him like twice in like the 3 years he's lived here. But we text, and we're always like, I always feel like this is the year where he's actually going to go with me to see the Mets when they play the Dodgers here in town, and then always last minute something comes up and he ends up not being able to go. But that's all right. So, and then a lot of people come out here for work, just for short stretches. I've seen a lot of people just visiting especially because I've lived here almost 20 years,
Yeah, that's good. And I imagine too, you have probably become quite used to the warm winters out there.
I'm very soft now because like I'll wake up here and, it's like it's mid-November while we're talking. And you wake up and it's like 46 degrees, and you'd think it was negative 46 degrees for the, it's like, I gotta, I'm putting my kids in their puffy jackets. I'm going to wear a hat. I got a sweatshirt and then a hoodie over it. And, I'm like, oh, I don't need to put on gloves. I can draw the line there, because you get in the car, it's still cold. Yeah. So you forget what, 20 below feels like. You forget what an air temperature of 5 degrees, no wind chill. Yeah, you forget what all that feels like.
That's brutal. But even like, I mean, you're talking about 46, Christian. I woke up this morning, it was like 33 degrees. I drive my son to school. It was brutal, like I can't take it. And I live here. I can only imagine not living here and living in a nice, pleasant climate for almost 20 years.
When I first came out, people told me that I would miss the seasons. And I was like, you are lying. And because I don't, I especially don't miss winter, Yeah,
I can imagine. I've heard people say that before, and I was like, I'm always thinking like, no, I don't think I would miss winter, and probably not fall either.
Yeah. The first year I lived here, there was a day where it was like early April and it was like 104 degrees in the valley. And I'm like, this is really too hot, but I'll take it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you still get that kind of heat out here too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. But it's a dry heat. We don't have the humidity.
I know.
So, you know.
That's right. You guys have had a drought though too, I guess. Are you?
Oh yeah, it never rains. Like it'll go like 6 months without raining. So that's a bit of a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable.
You're not one of those people watering their lawn, are you?
No, I don't have a lawn at the moment. I just because we have a townhouse. So, but when we have the new house, I believe you're allowed to water 1 day a week. So
1 day, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're moving that new house is in Burbank?
Yeah, it's a little bit closer to the kids' school actually, just the way it worked out. It's a lot more space. And we wanted to have a dedicated office because my wife as a writer, she ends up writing at home a lot. And but as it turns out, there's 2 offices. There's an office inside the house, and then in the garage, the back half of it was converted into an office, and the cellar produced podcasts. So I
heard you mention that actually.
Yeah.
On
talking to Tom. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, this is perfect. And the kids each have their own room now, which they've been sharing a room. And there was also a sitting room because like the front part of the house was built in like the 20s. And then it was expanded. They did, put an addition on in like the 80s. And then there's also like a huge living room. So it's a lot of space, which, I mean, I know you don't live in the city, but this amount of space, like, you and I could live 100 lifetimes and you wouldn't get this much space in Manhattan.
Yeah.
So, so I'm excited. And I don't know. I mean, it's different. It's like, I don't know, moving to LA from New York, it's like, it's the one place where you're like, oh, this is a little bit more slow paced, and people generally speaking are nicer, so, it's like, oh, people are friendlier. The weather's warmer. You spend a lot of time in traffic, but me, I never lived in the city. So I always had to deal with traffic. So I'm like, whatever, that's the same, because you're in the suburbs somewhere. So you probably always have traffic too. So the idea
I don't drive a whole lot.
Okay.
I don't deal with commuting traffic. If I'm commuting, I take the train,
Oh, good for you.
It's a whole different, it's bad and it's annoying, but it's not like traffic, you don't have to, you can just let somebody else deal with whatever the problems are on the tracks or whatever, but we live about 22 miles outside of Manhattan. So we got pretty far out, Christian. Same.
Well, I grew up 45 miles northwest from Manhattan, and it's like right where the suburbs start to get rural. And it was like, on paper, it was like an hour to the city, but, usually took a lot longer than that, even if you took a train or whatever. Yeah. But, it was, you start to appreciate those places, though, that are a little bit further out, and I mean, I grew up in a town called Greenwood Lake, New York, and it was like on a 9-mile lake. And it was like this beautiful, like, resort community throughout the 60s. And then families started moving out of the city. And you don't realize, like, oh, this place is amazing. This place is beautiful, but you just are like, oh my God, I wish I could, like, go to concerts or TV tapings or, good CD stores or whatever, actually go to a Mets game to get to Flushing from there. It took a little while, so, but so I don't know. I mean, that's the thing about living in LA is everything's close. It's so much closer than I ever had in my life. If I wanted to go to the movie theater as a kid, it was a half an hour away. To go to the good supermarket was like 15 minutes. So
you were up in that's almost rural.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the town next to where I grew up had like cow pastures and cornfields. Yeah. There's still a drive-in there in Warwick, New York. There's still a drive-in movie theater. Yeah. And, so it was like, it was this close to being like the sticks, but you still felt like you were, what's that?
You're from upstate.
Yeah. But it's like the southern part of the state.
I know. It's not really upstate.
Actual upstate people would be like, no, that's not upstate. That's downstate. I'm like, whatever.
Totally not. When I got to the city, everything literally, like the Bronx felt like upstate to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember saying when I was working on Insomniac with Dave Attell, you remember that show?
Oh, I remember that show.
One of the producers lived in like right outside the city. What is it? Right out of White Plains. You know, when
Okay.
you're just outside of like I guess maybe it's like Yonkers and then White Plains. And I said we were talking. He was like the executive producer of the show, and we were just talking. And he's like, "Yeah, I gotta head back up to White Plains." I'm like, "Oh, is that upstate?" Like stupidly.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's not. But I thought of everything as upstate then.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because it's just like, well, once you're out of the city, you know, it was like when I lived in Hoboken, it like took me less time to get to work than people who lived in Astoria. Like, oh, but I live in the city. You live in Jersey. I'm like, yeah, but I'll be at work in like 12 minutes.
Yeah. Hoboken is great and so close. So, I mean, it is. I always thought like, you know, they may as well just make it part of the city. You know, give Staten Island back to to Jersey, because if you look at a map, Staten Island should be in Jersey.
It absolutely should. Yeah, I think that they could have worked out a trade.
Yeah.
You know, for a borough to be named later.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Christian, this has been fun. We should wrap it up. I can't believe it. I just looked up. I just noticed that there's a little timer up there. We're at an hour and a half. This is like. Time flew.
This is what I do, you know.
Yeah, I didn't even realize.
And it's what you're starting to do. You realize like I could easily do another hour and a half, and sometimes I do, but generally speaking, it's like just save it for next time, you know.
Yeah, I feel like I got like other things I got to talk to you about, but I actually do have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So we'll do this again.
But I appreciate you taking the time to chat, and it's good. This is like. You know, I couldn't even tell you the last time we talked for more than an hour, you know?
I mean, in person. Yeah. I mean, we talk on Twitter and whatever, but an email, whatever, but it's so good to talk to you and get caught up with you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. As long as I have the social media, you can find me at Christian DMZ, and the podcast that I host is called the Bladtcast, Bladtcast. If you're watching this because you knew Andrew and I, 24 years ago, you'll see some familiar friends like our mutual friend, Tom Kelly.
Yeah.
Tim Sicardo's been on my podcast. I occasionally trick celebrities like John Lovitz and Dennis Miller into coming on my show.
Yeah, it's cool. And actually, it's good to watch too. I think I watched it I'm not sure if I watched it on YouTube or Twitter. I think it was YouTube.
Yeah,
but it's good to watch. Like I said, you get the comments up, and it's just a good feel, you know. And then you get
you feel like you're hanging out with somebody. It's weird because putting the show on YouTube, it didn't eat into how many people were downloading it and just listening to it. It's like a separate audience that just want to watch something, and I get it because sometimes I'll put something on and I just want to kind of like have it on in the background. But if it's like, oh, I can see it. You feel like you're more in on what's actually happening.
Totally, you get more engaged, and I enjoyed watching it, and I like your format, you know. I haven't listened to you. I haven't listened to one of your podcasts. I've only watched them. So
that's all right. It's the same, you know. It's just if people don't want to look at me, it's
the same. Just a little better, I think, if you're watching.
Yeah, I sweeten things a little bit for the audio version.
I agree.
I put some stuff in, but that's all right. It's fun to do this.
For the audio, you sweeten it up for the audio.
I do. Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, now I gotta listen to one.
Yeah, well, you'll hear some stuff that you didn't realize, like little clips and things, and stuff that I might sneak in there. But yeah, so it's fun. I like doing these kind of conversations live too, because you're talking about the people who offer feedback. So I'm sure that now that we've done this, I'll find a reason to have you on my show. I thought that maybe we might have been able to do something after the World Series, but that's not the way it worked out. But that was fun. We do a baseball playoff preview on my show, and everybody picked the Cardinals to win that first series.
Yeah.
So we didn't know what we were talking about.
Well, the Phillies just got hot, I think, at the right time.
Yeah.
There.
And, I think
in the right inning. It was that ninth inning because they were 8 innings of getting shut out in that game, and then they had a huge rally.
Yeah, and the Mets got called at the wrong time, September 1st,
Yeah.
and they never really warmed up after that. So
Yeah.
But-
Well, it was amazing too. I think what were there 300 win teams in the playoffs in the NL that I think won a total of 3 playoff games.
Yeah, the Dodgers won
Mets.
111. The Mets and Braves both won 101.
Yeah,
and and they were all out.
I know. Out fast.
Yeah. Well, that's all right. We'll talk next season, and maybe we can make a t-shirt bet, 2023 style. So.
We should do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, and thanks to everybody who watched. As I said, just find me on social media at Christian.
Yeah, Bladt. Christian Bladt. Thank you. It was great talking to you, and thanks for taking the time, and thanks for letting me use your thing because Zoom crapped out on us. But we'll do this again sometime. Definitely.
StreamYard is well worth the subscription.
Because
you can bring up those live comments, and you can even play around with some of the formatting and stuff like that. There's like little things that you can do, so it's well worth the investment.
Look at that. You're like a little live director there.
Ready, camera one, take one. All right, thank you, Andrew, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Later, man.